Some stories find us when we least expect them. They arrive not with fanfare, but with a quiet sound in the night, a cry we try to ignore. A weight on the chest that will not lift until we finally do what we know we must. This is a story about second chances. Not the grand, miraculous kind you read about in books, but the ordinary sort, the kind that come to us disguised as inconvenience, as someone else's problem, as a sound that keeps us awake when we would rather sleep. It is a story for those who have ever lain in the dark wondering if they should get involved, for those who have made mistakes and carried them like stones in their pockets, and for those who believe, even now, that it is never too late to become the person you were meant to be. This one is for you. 3 a.m. Margaret Sullivan opened her eyes before she understood why. The bedroom was dark. Harold's breathing came slow and steady beside her, the familiar rhythm of 41 years. The ceiling fan turned lazy circles overhead, stirring air that smelled of summer coming on. Then she heard it. Not a bark, something else entirely, a sound that crawled up from the end of the street and slipped through the window screen like smoke. It rose and fell, rose and fell, then cracked in the middle like a voice giving out. Margaret pulled the blanket to her chin. 17. She had been counting without meaning to. 17 nights now. That sound had pulled her from sleep. 17 nights she had lain here, staring at the ceiling, telling herself it was not her concern. The crying came again, longer this time. It did not stop so much as collapse, trailing off into a wheeze that made her chest tight. Harold shifted beside her, mumbled something about the rain gutters, went still. Margaret held her breath. She knew what made that sound. The whole street knew. The Vance place, 4 houses down. Abandoned since January when Derek Vance lost his job and disappeared, owing 3 months' rent. He had left everything behind, including the dog. The crying stopped. Silence dropped over the room like a hand pressing down. Margaret lay rigid, counting seconds, waiting for the sound to return. Nothing. Just the ceiling fan. Just Harold's breathing. Just the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. She should feel relieved. The noise had stopped. She could sleep now, but the silence was worse. It pressed against her ears, thick and questioning. It filled the dark corners of the room with things she did not want to think about. Is it still alive? Margaret closed her eyes tight. If it dies tonight, will you feel better? Is that what you are hoping for? She pulled the blanket higher, as if cotton and thread could keep the questions out. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. Headlights swept across the ceiling and vanished, leaving the room darker than before. Margaret did not sleep. She lay awake until the first gray light crept over the windowsill, listening to nothing at all, and wondering which was harder to bear, the sound of something suffering, or the silence that might mean it had finally stopped. If this story has already stirred something in your heart, we would love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us where you are reading from tonight sometimes. Knowing we are not alone makes all the difference. Morning light came through the kitchen window, pale and thin. Margaret stood at the counter, coffee mug in both hands, watching steam curl upward. She had not slept more than 2 hours. Her eyes felt like sandpaper, gritty and raw. Harold sat at the table behind her, newspaper spread open, reading glasses perched on his nose. He turned a page. The paper crackled in the quiet room. "You look like something the cat dragged in," he said without looking up. Margaret took a sip. The coffee was too hot. It burned going down, but she swallowed anyway. Couldn't sleep. "I noticed." She turned to face him. Harold Sullivan, 67 years old, hands still stained with decades of motor oil that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. 42 years at Henderson's garage before his back gave out. Now he fixed things around the house, read the paper front to back, and walked to Murphy's for cigarettes he was not supposed to smoke. He knew about the dog. Of course he knew. The whole street knew. Margaret set her mug down on the counter. The words sat in her throat like something stuck. That dog down on Maple. The one at the Vance place. Harold lowered the paper an inch. His eyes met hers over the wire frames, steady and patient. What about it? Someone ought to do something. The paper went back up. A page turned. Someone ought to. Margaret's jaw tightened. She looked out the window instead of at him. Mrs. Ruth Benson shuffled past on the sidewalk. Housecoat hanging loose, a plastic bag clutched in one hand. 78 years old. Bad hips. Lived alone in the blue house 3 doors down from the abandoned property. Margaret watched her turn the corner and disappear. She thought about a classroom in 1987. A boy named Danny Weaver, 8 years old. Bruises on his arms shaped like fingers. She had filed the report, done everything right. And the family had hired a lawyer, called her a liar, nearly cost her the job she had held for 15 years. The boy went back to his parents. She never found out what happened to him. Harold's voice cut through. You gonna stand there all day, or you gonna sit down and eat something? Margaret turned from the window. Her hands were shaking. Saturday morning. Margaret walked to Murphy's for milk and bread, the same route she had taken for 30 years. The sun sat high and warm. Dogwood blossoms lined the sidewalk, white petals drifting down in the light breeze. 2 houses over. The Kendall boy pushed a mower across his grandmother's lawn. The engines drone filling the quiet street. Margaret kept her eyes forward. She passed number 51, number 49. Then number 47, the Vance place. She had trained herself not to look. 8 months of walking past this house. 8 months of keeping her gaze fixed straight ahead on the cracked sidewalk. But today her feet slowed without permission. Today something tugged at her chest. A hook she could not name. She stopped. The house sat back from the street. Paint curling off the siding in gray strips. Weeds had swallowed the front yard. Climbing halfway up the porch rails. A rusted mailbox hung crooked from its post. The name Vance still visible in faded, stick-on letters. Margaret's fingers tightened on her purse strap. She stepped closer to the wooden fence, found a gap between the warped slats, pressed her eye to it. The backyard stretched out before her garbage bag split open across dead grass. Contents scattered and rotting. An overturned grill lay on its side, a plastic lawn chair missing 2 legs, and in the far corner, near a concrete post thick with rust stains, a dark shape. Motionless. Flies circled above it in lazy spirals, black specks against the bright sky. The smell hit her then. It came through the gap in the fence like something physical, thick and sour, cutting through the sweetness of the dogwood blossoms. Rot, waste, something animal and deeply wrong. Margaret's stomach clenched. It's dead? The thought came with a rush of something she refused to examine. The sound would stop now. No more crying in the dark. She could sleep through the night again. She stepped back from the fence, adjusted her purse on her shoulder, walked on toward Murphy's with her shoes clicking faster than usual against the concrete. The return trip took longer. Margaret carried a paper bag against her hip milk, bread, a small bag of the navel oranges Harold favored. The sun had climbed higher, pressing heat through her thin blouse. She approached number 47, kept walking, then stopped. Her body turned before her mind agreed to it. She crossed back to the fence, found the same gap between the boards, pressed her face to the weathered wood. The dark shape was still there in the corner, but it had moved. The head was lifted now barely, trembling with effort. Ears pressed flat against a skull too narrow, too sharp. Ribs showed through patchy fur like fingers pushing from inside. Margaret's breath stopped in her throat. The dog turned its head, slowly, as if the motion cost everything it had left to give. Its eyes found hers through the gap. No bark, no whimper, no tail movement, just eyes. Brown and flat and empty, looking at her without hope, without pleading, without anything at all. Margaret had seen eyes like that once before. Danny Weaver, third-grade classroom, the morning after she filed the report with Child Services. He had looked at her across the rows of small desks with that exact expression, not angry, not afraid, not hopeful, just finished. Something struck the sidewalk near her feet. Margaret looked down. An orange had slipped from her bag, rolling across the concrete. Then another. The paper sack was tilting in her numb grip. Groceries spilling onto the ground. She did not pick them up. When she looked back through the fence, the dog had lowered its head to the dirt. It lay in the same position as before, but its eyes stayed open, fixed on nothing, waiting for nothing. Margaret gathered the oranges with fingers that would not stop shaking. The milk carton was dented. The bread was crushed on one side. She walked home without looking back. That night, Margaret lay in bed with her eyes open. 3 in the morning. The hour when the crying always came. Silence. Harold's breathing filled the room. Slow and steady, the ceiling fan turned its endless circles. A car passed somewhere on the distant highway. No howling, no broken voice from the end of the street. Margaret stared at the dark ceiling. She should feel relieved. She had wanted this, the quiet, the peace, the end of that awful sound dragging her from sleep. But the silence sat on her chest like a stone. Is it still alive? She saw those eyes again, brown and empty, watching her through the gap in the fence. If it dies tonight, will you sleep better? Outside. The first birds began to stir, gray light touched the edge of the curtains. Margaret pressed her palm flat against her breastbone, feeling her own heart beat too fast beneath the thin cotton of her nightgown. Somewhere on Maple Street, 3 blocks away, an animal was either sleeping or dying, and Margaret Sullivan could not decide which answer frightened her more. Sunday morning. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and old coffee. Margaret stood at the counter, pouring a second cup she did not want. Her hands trembled slightly. She gripped the pot tighter to steady them. Harold sat at the table, newspaper spread before him, reading glasses sliding down his nose. He turned a page without looking up. Margaret set the pot back on the burner. The words felt like gravel in her throat. "There's a dog." Harold did not move. "I know. You know. Whole street knows. Maggie." He turned another page, calm as Sunday morning. "Been there since Vance took off back in January." The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone's sprinkler hissed against a driveway. Margaret pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Someone ought to do something. Harold lowered the paper an inch. His eyes met hers over the wire frames, patient, waiting. "Someone ought to—" He raised the paper again. Margaret stared at the back of the sports section. Neither of them spoke. The clock above the stove ticked off seconds into the quiet room. The phone book sat open on the kitchen counter, pages soft with age. Margaret dialed the number for County Animal Control. The phone rang 4 times before a woman answered. Her voice flat and tired. "Animal Services. How can I help you?" "There's a dog. Abandoned property on Maple Street. Number 47. It's been there for months. Since January." Keyboard clicking. A pause. "Ma'am, we have a report on file for that address from 4 months ago. 4 months? Margaret's grip tightened on the receiver. Then why hasn't anyone— It's private property. We can't enter without owner consent or a police warrant showing immediate danger to human safety. The dog is dying. I understand, ma'am, but legally, our hands are tied unless— Legally, the word tasted like ashes. If you'd like to file an additional report, I can— Margaret hung up. She stood with her hand still on the receiver, knuckles white, staring at the faded wallpaper above the phone. From the living room came Harold's voice. What'd they say? Same thing they always say. She turned away from the wall. Legally. A long pause, then Harold, quiet. Well, I'll be— 3 o'clock, Sunday afternoon. The sun pressed down on Maple Street, softening the asphalt. Margaret stood alone in front of number 47. The gate was padlocked. Rust had eaten through the chain in places, staining the wood below it orange, but the lock held firm. The fence rose above her head. Slats warped and gray with years of weather. She found a gap between the boards, pressed her face to it. The backyard stretched out garbage and dead weeds and the skeleton of a lawn chair. The concrete post stood in the far corner, chain wrapped around its base. The dog lay at the end of that chain. Margaret cupped her hands around her mouth. Hey. Her voice cracked. She swallowed. Tried again. Hey, boy, can you hear me? Metal scraped against concrete. The chain. The dog's head lifted from the weeds. Slowly, with visible effort, ears flat, eyes ringed with white, it tried to stand. The front legs pushed against the ground. The body rose an inch, 2 inches. Muscles trembled beneath loose skin, then the left leg buckled. The dog collapsed sideways. The chain rattled. A sound escaped its throat, not quite a whimper. Something smaller and more broken than that. Margaret saw the wound, the left foreleg, just above the paw, swollen to twice its normal size, skin stretched tight and shining. Yellow fluid seeped from a crack in the center, thick and slow, catching the afternoon light. The smell hit her through the fence, sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the summer heat. Margaret pressed her hand over her mouth. Her stomach heaved. She stepped back, turned, walked away. Her legs carried her home before her mind could catch up. Night fell slowly. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, the house quiet around her. Harold was downstairs watching television, the volume low enough that only the occasional burst of canned laughter reached the second floor. She pulled open the nightstand drawer. Papers, old receipts Harold had never filed, a watch with a dead battery she kept meaning to replace, and beneath it all, pressed flat at the bottom, a card. White construction paper, folded in half, edges soft with age. She lifted it carefully, as if it might crumble in her hands. The handwriting on the front was messy, the writing of a child who had not yet learned to stay inside the lines. Thank you for trying. Mrs. Sullivan. Margaret did not open it. She already knew what was inside. A drawing of a house with a yellow sun. 2 stick figures, one tall with brown hair, one small with yellow. Danny Weaver would be 38 years old now. Living somewhere. Maybe. Working somewhere. Maybe married with children of his own, standing in his own kitchen on some Sunday morning, drinking coffee and reading the paper. Or maybe not. She had never found out. After the lawsuit threat, after the family moved away, she had let it go. Told herself there was nothing more she could do. Told herself she had tried. The card sat in her palm, light as air and heavy as a stone. Margaret placed it back in the drawer. Pushed the drawer closed. Her hand stayed on the wooden knob. The television laughed downstairs. The clock on the nightstand glowed 9:47 in red numbers. Margaret pulled the drawer open again. The card lay where she had left it, white against the shadows. Thank you for trying. Not for succeeding. Not for saving him. For trying. Margaret stared at those words for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the bedroom door, and called down the stairs. Harold? The television went quiet. Yeah. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I need your help with something tomorrow morning. Early. A pause. The creak of his recliner. What kind of something? Margaret gripped the doorframe. The kind that needs bolt cutters? Monday, 6 a.m. The house still dark. Margaret came down the stairs in her old house dress, feet bare on the cold wood. She had dressed quickly, not bothering with stockings or proper shoes. Her hands would not stop trembling. The kitchen light was already on. Harold stood by the counter, his toolbox open beside him. Bolt cutters, wire snips, a heavy pair of leather work gloves worn soft with decades of use. He wore his old coveralls, the ones stained with 30 years of motor oil and transmission fluid. He looked up when she entered the doorway. Well, Margaret stopped, her throat tight. Well? Harold nodded once. He closed the toolbox, picked it up by the handle, and walked past her toward the front door. Neither of them said another word. Maple Street lay empty in the early light. No cars, no dog walkers, no children waiting for school buses. Just the two of them walking side by side, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. Birds sang in the dogwood trees. A sprinkler hissed somewhere behind a hedge. The air smelled of cut grass and dew, and the promise of heat to come. Number 51, number 49, number 47. The fence looked taller in the gray morning light. The padlock hung heavy on its rusted chain, orange streaks bleeding down the wood beneath it. Harold set his toolbox on the sidewalk, opened it, selected the bolt cutters without hesitation. Margaret watched his hands steady. Sure, the hands of a man who had spent 42 years fixing broken things. He positioned the blades around the chain link, tested the grip, and squeezed. Metal bit through metal with a sound like a bone snapping. The chain fell away. The padlock clattered against the fence post. Harold pushed the gate open. The smell hit them like a wall. Margaret doubled over, hand pressed hard against her mouth, stomach heaving. Her eyes watered. The stench crawled into her nose, her throat, coating her tongue with something thick and foul that she could taste. Lord have mercy, Harold said quietly. Margaret straightened, forced herself to look. The backyard was worse than she had seen through the fence. Garbage everywhere, torn bags, rotting food scraps, broken glass glinting in the early light. The grass had died months ago, leaving only mud and weeds and pools of dark water that smelled of things she did not want to name. Flies rose in thick clouds from a pile near the back steps, and in the corner, chained to the concrete post. The dog, it lay in a shallow pool of filthy water, barely recognizable as a living creature. Fur matted with dirt and waste, ribs jutting sharp beneath loose skin that seemed too large for the body underneath. The chain had worn a groove into its neck, the flesh raw and weeping where metal met bone. Margaret walked toward it. Her shoes sank into mud with each step. Cold water seeping through the canvas. The smell grew stronger infection, waste, the sweet rot of flesh giving up. She knelt down, her knees pressed into cold muck. She felt it soak through her house dress, but she did not move away. The dog lifted its head, slowly, the effort visible in every trembling muscle, every strained tendon. Its eyes found hers. And then it did something Margaret did not expect. It whimpered. Not a cry for help, not a plea for food or water. A small, broken sound that seemed almost like an apology, as if it were sorry for the smell. for the filth, for being such a ruined thing that someone had to kneel in mud to reach it. Margaret's vision blurred. Harold appeared beside her, bolt cutters in hand. He knelt down too, his knees sinking into the same muck, and positioned the blades around the chain where it met the collar. "Easy now," he murmured. "Easy, boy. We got you." The chain snapped. The dog did not move. The veterinary clinic smelled of disinfectant and dog hair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in flat white light. A cat yowled somewhere in the back rooms, and a phone rang twice before someone picked it up. Margaret sat in a hard plastic chair, her muddy house dress wrapped around her, hands clasped tight in her lap. Harold stood by the window with his arms crossed, watching the parking lot without seeing it. They had been waiting for over an hour. The door to the examination room swung open. Dr. Tom Bradley emerged, pulling off latex gloves. 55 years old, gray hair cropped military short, forearms marked with old scars from bites and scratches accumulated over 30 years of practice. His face gave nothing away. 8 months. He shook his head slowly. How in the world did that animal survive 8 months? Margaret's voice came out hoarse. The neighbor lady, Ruth Benson. She told us she'd been sneaking him scraps through the fence since February. Bread, mostly. Table scraps when she had them. Water when it didn't rain. Dr. Bradley nodded. Processing this. That explains it. Barely. He pulled a plastic chair over and sat down across from them, elbows on his knees, hands clasped between them. The infection in that leg is severe. It's gone deep into the bone. Most likely, I'm going to try to save it, but I can't make any promises. If the tissue is too far gone, we're looking at amputation. Margaret's stomach dropped. Surgery's going to run you about $3,000, maybe more, depending on what I find once I get in there. $3,000. Margaret thought about the savings account. 11 years of careful deposits. A little bit each month set aside from Harold's pension and her Social Security. Emergency money, just in case money. She looked at Harold. He looked back at her, his face calm and unreadable as always. Well, she thought, this is the case. Do what you have to do. Doc? Dr. Bradley stood. He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. Most folks would have kept walking, pretended they didn't see anything. He did not turn around. I'll let you know when he's out of surgery. The door swung closed behind him. 4 hours passed. Margaret paced the small waiting room until her legs ached, sat down, stood up, paced again. Harold remained at the window. A stone in the current. The door opened. Dr. Bradley emerged, surgical cap pushed back on his head, sweat staining the collar of his scrubs. He was smiling. He's a fighter, that one. He pulled off the cap. Kept the leg. Margaret's knees went weak. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. He's not out of the woods yet. Dr. Bradley continued. Next few days are critical, but he made it through surgery, and that's more than I expected. He's strong, stronger than he has any right to be. Can we see him? Margaret's voice did not sound like her own. Give him an hour to come out of the anesthesia. He'll be groggy, but he'll know you're there. The recovery room was small and quiet. A single fluorescent tube cast pale light over a row of metal kennels. Most stood empty. The dog lay in the largest one. A white bandage wrapped thick around his foreleg. An IV line running from his other paw to a bag of clear fluid hanging above. His eyes were half open, unfocused, glazed with sedation. Dr. Bradley stood behind them in the doorway. Does he have a name? Margaret shook her head. I don't know. The previous owner. She trailed off. She did not know what to call Derek Vance. Harold stood at the kennel door, hands in his pockets, looking down at the ruined animal inside. He had not spoken since they arrived at the clinic. "Buddy," he said. Margaret turned. Harold shrugged without meeting her eyes. "Every man needs a buddy. Ain't that right?" Inside the kennel, the dog's eyes flickered, his head turned slowly toward Harold's voice, and his tail moved. Just a twitch, a faint tremor that traveled down the length of matted fur. But it was the first time. The blanket was old and faded, a blue plaid that Margaret had meant to throw away for years. Harold folded it into quarters and placed it in the corner of the kitchen. Near the radiator, where the floor stayed warm, Buddy lay on top of it, eyes open, watching everything. He would not venture deeper into the house. When Margaret tried to lead him toward the living room, he planted his feet and refused to move, legs trembling, eyes darting to every doorway and shadow, so the kitchen became his world. He refused to eat if anyone watched. Margaret learned to set his bowl down and turn away, busying herself at the sink while listening to the frantic sounds of him eating fast. Desperate, gulping food as if it might vanish at any moment. At night, he did not sleep. Margaret came downstairs at 2 a.m. for a glass of water and found him lying on his blanket with his eyes fixed on the back door. Watching. Waiting. For what? She did not know. When he heard her footsteps, he scrambled to his feet and pressed himself into the corner, shaking so hard his teeth clicked together. Margaret stood still in the doorway, did not move toward him, did not speak. 5 minutes. 10. Her legs ached. Her back throbbed. Finally, Buddy lowered himself to the floor, still watching, still awake, but no longer shaking. Margaret went back to bed without her water. The second week, Tuesday morning. Margaret was making breakfast when the cast-iron skillet slipped from her grip. It struck the tile floor with a crash that shook the windows. Buddy exploded. He shot across the kitchen, legs scrambling on the smooth tile, and threw himself into the far corner. A puddle of urine spread beneath him on the floor. He pressed his body against the wall, eyes squeezed shut, all 4 legs curled up over his head, the posture of an animal waiting to be struck. Margaret stood frozen, the skillet still rocking on the floor at her feet. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Someone taught him this. She did not pick up the pan, did not move toward him, did not speak. Instead, she lowered herself to the kitchen floor, slowly, carefully. She sat with her back against the refrigerator, 2 yards away from where Buddy cowered, and she waited. The kitchen clock ticked. A car passed outside, somewhere down the street. A dog barked. Margaret did not move. 15 minutes. Her hip ached against the hard tile. Buddy opened one eye. She was still there. 20 minutes. 25. His shoulders dropped. His breathing slowed. His legs uncurled, inch by inch, until he lay flat on the floor. He watched her. She watched him. The front door opened. Harold's footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. His eyes moved from Margaret on the floor to Buddy in the corner to the skillet lying between them. He did not ask what happened. He walked to the coffee pot, poured himself a cup, and sat down at the table. The 3 of them stayed like that, Margaret on the floor, Harold at the table, Buddy in the corner as the morning light shifted from gray to gold. Something had changed. Margaret could feel it. Though she could not name it, a door had opened somewhere. And for the first time, Buddy had not run through it. 4 months later. The September sun slanted through the kitchen window, painting warm rectangles on the tile floor. Buddy lay in one of those golden patches, his head resting on his front paws, watching Margaret wash the breakfast dishes. His tail thumped against the floor when she glanced down at him. 4 months. It had taken 4 months to get here to this moment where a dog could lie in a patch of sunlight without flinching at every sound, without pressing himself into corners, without watching the doors as if waiting for something terrible to come through them. He walked with a slight hitch in his left leg now. The bone had healed, but Dr. Bradley said the limp would never fully go away. A permanent reminder of what had been done to him, written into muscle and tendon and the way he moved through the world. But he moved. He ran, sometimes. When Harold took him to the park where the old men played chess beneath the oak trees, he chased squirrels he would never catch and came back panting. Tongue hanging sideways, looking up at Harold with something that might have been joy. He slept in the living room now, on a proper dog bed Margaret had bought at the hardware store, positioned where he could see both the front door and the kitchen doorway. He no longer watched those doors all night. He closed his eyes. He dreamed legs twitching, soft sounds escaping his throat as he chased whatever dogs chase in their sleep. Margaret dried her hands on the dish towel and walked to her reading chair by the front window. A paperback lay open on the side table, a mystery novel she had been working through for 2 weeks. She settled into the cushions and picked up the book. The house was quiet. Harold had taken Buddy for their morning walk 20 minutes ago. She could hear them now, Harold's boots on the porch steps, the click of Buddy's nails on the wooden boards, the jingle of his new collar tags. The front door opened. Buddy trotted in first, tongue hanging, sides heaving from exertion. He made his usual circuit of the living room, checking corners, sniffing baseboards, then walked to Margaret's chair and stopped. He looked up at her, then, slowly, he lowered his head and rested it on her knee. The weight of it pressed through her skirt, warm and solid and real. His eyes drifted half-closed. His body relaxed against the side of her chair. Margaret's hands froze on the book. He had never done this before. She had touched him careful pats on the head, slow strokes along his back when he was eating. But he had never sought her out, never offered himself like this, without being asked. "Well, ain't that something?" Harold stood in the doorway, leash still in his hand. His voice was soft. Margaret could not answer. Her throat had closed around something too large for words. Her eyes burned. She blinked, and wetness slid down her cheek. Saturday afternoon. The last warm breath of September pressing against the windows. Margaret stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing lunch plates, when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the front door. Confident, impatient. Buddy's head lifted from his bed, his ears flattened against his skull. "I'll get it." Margaret dried her hands and walked through the living room to the front hall. Buddy followed 3 feet behind her, his body low, muscles tense. She opened the door. A man stood on the porch, young, late 20s, maybe 30, long hair, unwashed, hanging past the collar of a wrinkled t-shirt spotted with stains. Sunken cheeks, dark hollows beneath bloodshot eyes. "Mrs. Sullivan." His voice came out rough, like he had not used it much lately. "I'm Derek Vance. Used to live down the street." The name hit Margaret like cold water, behind her. Buddy went rigid, every muscle locked. A low sound started in his throat, not a growl, not a whimper, something between, something wrong. Derek's eyes moved past her shoulder. His face changed a smile spreading across it, showing yellowed teeth. "Hey, there he is." He took a step forward. "Hey, Rex. Come here, boy." Rex. The name hung in the air between them. His name was Rex. Buddy did not move, did not wag his tail, did not go to the voice that had once commanded his world. Derek's smile faltered. "Come on, Rex. It's me. It's Daddy." Margaret found her voice. "What do you want?" Derek's attention shifted back to her. The smile returned. Smaller now, more careful. Look, I heard you folks been taking care of him. Mrs. Benson told me when I stopped by her place last week said you broke in and rescued him back in the spring. He rubbed the back of his neck. I appreciate that. Really. I do. But I'm back on my feet now. Got a new place over in Millbrook, and I want my dog back. Your dog? Yeah. He shrugged. Palms up. I mean, technically, he's still mine, right? I got the papers somewhere. Registration, shots, all that. Margaret's hand tightened on the doorframe. You left him chained up for 8 months. He almost died. Derek's jaw tightened. Something flickered across his face, anger, or maybe shame before disappearing behind careful blankness. I was going through some stuff. Okay, lost my job. My girl took off. I couldn't handle... He spread his hands. I just couldn't. But I'm better now. Better. Yeah. Better. Behind Margaret. Buddy made a sound. Small, strangled, like a hand was wrapped around his throat. Derek stepped forward, 1 foot crossing the threshold before Margaret could stop him. Excuse me. But he was already past her, moving into the hallway, his eyes fixed on Buddy. Come here, Rex. Come to Daddy. Buddy's bladder released, urine pooled on the hardwood floor, spreading around his paws in a dark stain. He did not seem to notice. Then he did something that made Margaret's stomach turn to ice. He lay down. Not the relaxed sprawl of a comfortable dog. This was different. He rolled onto his back, legs folding tight against his chest. Belly exposed. His head turned to the side, eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to meet Derek's gaze, complete surrender. Then he began to crawl, inch by inch. He dragged himself across the wet floor toward Derek's feet. His tail was clamped between his hind legs. His ears pressed flat against his skull. Soft whimpers escaped with each movement, high and thin, like a child trying not to cry. 8 months of starvation. 4 months of healing. Morning walks, a bed by the window, learning to sleep without fear. None of it mattered. The voice of his old master called, and every lesson his body had ever learned answered. Derek laughed, short, triumphant. See, he remembers me. He squatted down, reaching for Buddy's head. The front door opened wider behind Margaret. Harold's voice, flat as a blade. Something I can help you with. Derek straightened, turned. Harold stood on the porch, a bag of groceries in one arm. His eyes locked on the younger man with an expression Margaret had not seen in 40 years. Derek smiled again. It did not reach his eyes. Just came to collect what's mine. Harold did not move, did not blink. That's so. The 2 men stared at each other across the threshold. Buddy lay on the wet floor between them, trembling, waiting for whatever came next. Harold stepped inside, setting the grocery bag on the hall table. His movements were slow, deliberate. He did not take his eyes off Derek. Maggie, why don't you take Buddy into the kitchen? Margaret did not move. Her legs had turned to wood. Derek held up both hands, palms out, still smiling that careful smile. Look, I don't want any trouble here. I'm just trying to handle this civil, neighborly. Civil. Harold's voice was flat as pavement. Yeah, civil. Derek crossed his arms over his stained shirt. I could have just called the cops. Made a whole big thing about it. Breaking and entering, theft of property. But I figured you folks seemed decent enough. We can work something out between us. Work something out. The dog, Derek gestured toward Buddy, still lying in the puddle of his own urine, shaking like a leaf in a storm. He's legally mine. Got the papers to prove it. But vet bills, food, all that stuff you've been spending on him. That ain't cheap, right? Harold said nothing. His face could have been carved from stone. Derek shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes moved between them, calculating. I'm just saying, if someone was to compensate me for my loss here, I could sign him over, legal and clean. No hard feelings. Margaret's stomach turned. Compensate you? $1,000? Derek shrugged. That's more than fair. Considering. Fair? Look, lady, I'm trying to be reasonable. You're trying to sell your dog. Margaret stepped forward. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides without her noticing. The dog you left chained to a post for 8 months. The dog you left to starve and rot while you ran off to wherever you ran off to. And now you want us to pay you for the privilege of saving his life. Derek's face hardened. The smile vanished. I told you. I was going through. You chained him to a post and walked away. Her voice rose. 8 months. 8 months he cried every night and you never came back. He ate garbage. He drank rainwater when he was lucky. His leg rotted until the bone showed through and still you never came back. And now you stand in my house and ask for money. Harold reached for his back pocket. His wallet. Harold, no. He looked at her. Shai are not paying ransom for a dog this man left to die. Derek laughed. Short, sharp, ugly. Ransom! That's rich. He shook his head. And when he looked at her again, something had changed in his eyes, something cold and knowing. You got a lot of nerve, lady, standing there in your nice clean house, acting like you're better than me. Margaret's jaw tightened. I am better than you. Yeah. Derek took a step toward her. Harold moved. But Derek stopped just out of reach. His eyes locked on Margaret's face. You think so. You really think so. I know so. Then let me tell you what Mrs. Benson told me. That sweet old lady who was sneaking my dog Scraps through the fence because she was too scared to do anything else? Margaret's throat closed. She told me you live 3 blocks away. 3 blocks? Derek held up 3 fingers, waving them in her face. She told me you heard that dog crying every single night. Heard him howling and screaming from your bedroom window. And you know what else she told me? Margaret could not speak. 17 days. Derek's voice dropped low, almost gentle. 17 days. You lay in your bed and listened to him suffer. 17 days you heard him begging for someone to help him. And you did nothing, not one thing. Just pulled up your covers and went back to sleep. The hallway seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing in. At least I had the guts to leave. Derek spread his arms wide. I couldn't handle it, so I walked away. I own that. I know what I am. But you, he pointed at her chest. You sat in your nice warm house 3 blocks away and you listened to an animal dying. Night after night after night. And you told yourself it wasn't your problem. That's enough, Harold said. Derek ignored him. His eyes never left Margaret's face. 17 days. That's what it took before you finally decided to do something. 17 days of listening to him scream before your conscience got too heavy to carry. He stepped back toward the door. So don't you dare stand there and judge me. Don't you dare act like you're some kind of saint. At least I know what I am. Do you? He pulled the door open. Keep the dog. I don't want your money. The door slammed behind him. The house shook. Silence. Margaret stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. Her lungs would not fill. Her hands trembled at her sides. Useless. Buddy whimpered from the floor. She looked down at him. He lay in the cooling puddle of his own urine. eyes wide and wet and confused. Watching her, his tail gave a weak twitch, a question, a hope. Margaret turned away. She walked through the kitchen, past the table, past the counter, to the back door. She gripped the frame with both hands and stared out at the yard without seeing anything at all. 17 days. She had counted every one. She remembered them now, a string of dark beads, each one exactly like the last, the first night, telling herself it was just a stray passing through. The second night, telling herself someone else would handle it. The third, the fourth, the fifth, every night, pulling the blanket higher, every morning, walking to Murphy's with her eyes fixed and straight ahead. You just listened, night after night, and did nothing. She was no different from the neighbors who walked past number 47 every day. No different from the people who heard Danny Weaver crying in the bathroom and pretended they did not notice. She had told herself she was different because she finally acted. Because she finally broke down that gate and spent $3,000 and sat on cold kitchen floors waiting for a broken animal to stop being afraid of her. But Derek was right. She had not done it for Buddy. She had done it to silence the noise in her own head, to stop the guilt that dragged her from sleep every night, to make herself feel like a decent person again. It had always been about her. Footsteps behind her, the click of nails on tile. Buddy appeared at her side. He pressed his muzzle against her hand, the gesture he had learned over these 4 months, the gesture of trust, of comfort offered. Margaret pulled her hand away. She stepped back. 1 step, 2. Buddy's ears flattened, his tail tucked. He looked up at her with those brown eyes, confused, wounded. "Go away," her voice cracked. "Go on. Get out of here." Buddy did not move. "I said go." He lowered himself to the floor. Slowly, carefully. He lay down 2 feet from where she stood, his head on his paws, watching her. He would not leave, even now, even after she pushed him away. He stayed. Margaret slid down the cabinet until she sat on the cold tile floor, her back pressed against the wood. Her knees drew up to her chest. She did not cry. The tears were there, somewhere deep. But they would not come. There was only this, the hollow space behind her ribs, the weight pressing down on her shoulders, the shame sitting in her stomach like a stone she had swallowed whole. 63 years old, a lifetime of believing she was one of the good ones, and now she sat on her kitchen floor, unable to look at the dog she had saved, because his eyes asked a question she could not answer. The kitchen grew dark around her. Margaret did not move to turn on the lights. She sat against the cabinet, knees drawn to her chest, watching shadows stretch across the floor as the sun dropped below the tree line outside the window. Buddy had not moved either. He lay 2 feet away, head on his paws, eyes open and watching her. She had told him to leave. He had stayed. The refrigerator clicked and hummed. The clock above the stove ticked off seconds, minutes, hours. Outside, a car passed on the street, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling before disappearing. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Harold appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, silhouetted against the hall light, taking in the scene, his wife on the floor, the dog keeping vigil beside her, the darkness pressing in from the windows. He did not turn on the light. He walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. The wood groaned under his weight. Neither of them spoke. The clock ticked. Buddy's breathing was soft and steady in the quiet room. He was right. Margaret's voice came out hoarse, cracked from hours of silence. "About me." Harold did not answer immediately. She heard him shift in the chair, heard the familiar creak of his bones settling. "What do you think he was right about?" 17 days. Harold. She pressed her forehead against her knees. I listened for 17 days. Silence. Then Harold spoke, his voice low and even in the darkness. You remember when Tommy Hendrick's barn caught fire summer of '94? Margaret lifted her head. The question made no sense. She could not see where he was going with it. The barn fire. What does that have to do with... Just listen. She closed her mouth. Harold's chair creaked again. Half the town showed up to watch that barn burn. I was one of them. Stood there in the road with my hands in my pockets like a fool, watching flames climb up the walls. Could feel the heat from 50 feet away. Hot enough to curl the hair on my arms. Horses were screaming inside. Terrible sound. Margaret remembered. She had stayed home that night, but she had heard about it for weeks afterward. The barn had burned to its foundation. 2 horses died, trapped in their stalls. Then old Earl Crawford came driving up in that beat-up Ford tractor of his. Harold's voice was quiet, almost gentle. 73 years old. Bad hip that made him walk like a broken gate. Could barely climb out of bed most mornings without his wife's help. But he drove that tractor right up to the barn doors. Flames licking at his face, and started hauling out hay bales. Clearing a path so the horses could get out, Margaret stared at the dark shape of her husband, trying to understand. Rest of us just stood there watching. I remember thinking, clear as day, someone ought to help that old man, but my feet didn't move. None of ours did. Just stood there with our hands in our pockets, while a 73-year-old man with a bad hip did what we were all too scared to do. The refrigerator hummed. Earl saved one of those horses. The other one was already gone by the time he got to it. He came out of that barn with his eyebrows burned off and his shirt smoking. And you know what he said when I went up to him after... When I tried to tell him how brave he was, Margaret shook her head, though she was not sure he could see her in the darkness. He said, Harold, I wasn't brave. I was just too tired of being a coward. The words hung in the air between them. Margaret turned them over in her mind. Too tired of being a coward. I don't understand, she said. What does that have to do with... You listened for 17 days. Harold's voice cut through the darkness. That's true. Can't change it. Can't take it back. But on day 18, you stopped listening and started doing... You broke down that gate. You carried that dog to the car. You spent $3,000 we couldn't really afford to save his leg. That doesn't make up for... No, Harold's voice was firm. It don't. Nothing makes up for it. Nothing erases those 17 nights. You can't go back and unhear what you heard. Margaret's throat tightened. But here's the thing. Maggie... Harold leaned forward. She heard his elbows settle on his knees, heard his work-roughened hands clasped together. Most people never stop being cowards. They hear the crying. They feel bad about it. They tell themselves someone else will handle it. And they go their whole lives never doing a single hard thing. Not once. Not ever. They die with their hands still in their pockets. He paused. You did something. Late? Maybe. Too late for some things. But you did it anyway. Earl Crawford wasn't brave. He was just tired of being the other kind of man. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for. He pushed himself up from the chair. His knees popped in the silence. His footsteps moved toward the hallway. He stopped at the doorway. That dog over there don't know anything about 17 days. He don't know about guilt or shame or any of the things you're beating yourself up over. He only knows one thing. Margaret waited. He only knows you came. Footsteps on the stairs. The creak of the bedroom door. Silence. Margaret sat alone in the dark kitchen. He only knows you came. She looked at Buddy. He had not moved. His eyes reflected what little light came through the window, 2 small gleams fixed on her face. He did not know about the 17 nights she had lain awake, listening to his cries and doing nothing. He did not know about her guilt, her shame, her desperate need to silence the noise in her own head. He only knew that one morning, the gate opened. Someone cut the chain. Someone carried him to a car that smelled of coffee and motor oil. Someone sat with him on a cold tile floor when he was too terrified to move. That someone was her. It did not erase the 17 days. Nothing could, but it was something. 2 in the morning, Margaret had not slept. She sat at the kitchen table now, a cold cup of coffee in front of her, watching shadows move across the walls as cars passed on the distant highway. Buddy lay on his bed in the corner. He had moved there sometime after midnight, padding across the floor to his blanket, but his eyes stayed open, watching her. She was not sure anymore who was keeping watch over whom. The house creaked around them, old bones settling in the night. Margaret wrapped her hands around the cold mug, too tired of being a coward. Earl Crawford had been 73. Bad hip, could barely walk. Margaret was 63. 2 good legs, 2 working hands. She could not change the past, could not go back and break down that gate on day 1 instead of day 18. Could not unhear the cries she had ignored or unfeel the shame that sat in her chest like a stone. But she could choose what came next. She could sit here in the darkness, drowning in guilt, pushing away the one creature who still trusted her, or she could be the person who came. Not because she deserved to be that person, not because it made up for anything, but because that was who she wanted to be from now on. Buddy's nails clicked on the floor. Margaret looked up. He was standing, watching her from across the kitchen. His tail hung low, not tucked between his legs, not wagging, somewhere in between. Waiting. He took 1 step toward her, stopped, another step. Stopped, as if asking permission. Margaret did not move, did not speak. She sat still and let him come. Step, stop, step, stop. He reached her chair, stood beside her, close enough to touch. His muzzle lifted. He pressed his cold nose against her hand where it rested on the table. Margaret turned her hand over, palm up. Buddy lowered his head and rested it in her palm, the weight of him, the warmth. "I'm sorry." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry I pushed you away." His tail moved, slow, gentle. She stroked the fur between his ears with her other hand. He leaned into her touch, eyes half closing. "I can't promise I'll always get it right." The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had not looked at in a very long time. "But I can promise I'll keep showing up, every day, for as long as I'm able." Buddy exhaled, a long, slow breath, as if he had been holding it for months. He sank down beside her chair, his body pressed warm against her legs. His head rested heavy on her foot, and for the first time since she had brought him home. He slept without watching the door. Margaret sat in the darkness, her hand on his head, watching his ribs rise and fall outside the window. The first gray light crept over the rooftops. 6 months later. Margaret opened her eyes to the sound of metal on tile. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and pale. The bed was warm beneath her. Harold's side was empty, the sheets still holding the shape of him. From downstairs came the familiar sounds, the clatter of Buddy's food bowl being set on the kitchen floor, the rush of kibble pouring from the bag, Harold's voice, low and gruff. "Easy there, boy. Ain't nobody taking it from you." Margaret lay still, listening, the click of nails on tile, the wet sound of Buddy eating, the creak of the coffee pot being lifted from its stand. Harold humming something tuneless under his breath, an old hymn. Maybe. Or a song from the radio he had heard decades ago and never quite forgotten. She had spent so many years waking to silence. Two people moving through the same house, the same routines, the same quiet spaces between them. Now, there was this. Margaret pushed back the covers and sat up. Her joints protested 63 years of living, making themselves known in the usual places. She reached for her housecoat draped over the chair by the window and pulled it on. The stairs creaked under her feet. 11 steps. She knew each one by sound. The kitchen was bright with October morning sun. Harold stood at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, the blue one with the chipped handle for her, the plain white one for himself. Buddy sat by his empty bowl, tail sweeping the floor in wide arcs, watching Harold's every movement. "Morning," Harold said without turning around. "Morning." He handed her the blue mug. She wrapped both hands around it, feeling the heat seep into her palms and fingers. Buddy trotted over and pressed his nose against her knee. His tail wagged harder. "Someone's happy to see you," Harold said. Margaret reached down and scratched behind Buddy's ears. He leaned into her hand, eyes drifting half-closed. "What's on the agenda today?" Harold took a sip of his coffee, considering. "Thought I'd take Buddy down to Miller Lake. Water's still warm enough. Might be the last good weekend before the cold sets in. I'll pack sandwiches. Turkey. Turkey." Harold nodded. He set his mug on the counter and reached for Buddy's leash hanging by the back door. "Come on, boy. Let's go see if those squirrels remember you." Buddy's ears perked forward. His whole body wiggled with anticipation. Margaret watched them go, her husband of 41 years and the dog who had stumbled into their lives 8 months ago. Harold walked with the slight stoop that age had given him. Buddy with the hitch in his left leg that would never fully heal. 2 old creatures, keeping each other company. The screen door banged shut behind them. Margaret stood at the window with her cooling coffee and watched them disappear around the corner of the house. Miller Lake sat 3 miles outside of town, past the old feed mill and the Methodist cemetery where Margaret's parents were buried beneath matching granite stones. Harold parked the truck in the gravel lot near the boat ramp. Before he could get the door fully open, Buddy was scrambling over his lap, paws scrabbling at the window, whining with excitement. All right. Harold pushed the door wide. "Go on, then." Buddy launched himself from the truck and hit the sand running. Margaret climbed out more slowly, the cooler in one hand and a folding chair in the other. The air smelled of lake water and pine needles and the faint decay of autumn leaves beginning to turn. A breeze lifted the hair from her forehead. She set up the chair near the water's edge and settled into it, the cooler beside her feet. Harold stood a few yards away, hands in his pockets, watching Buddy tear across the narrow beach. The dog ran in wide, joyful circles, kicking up sand, tongue hanging sideways from his mouth. He splashed into the shallow water, leaped back out, shook himself until his ears flapped and plunged in again. "Would you look at that?" Harold said quietly. Margaret watched Buddy paddle out into deeper water, his head bobbing above the surface, legs churning beneath. He swam in a wide arc, turned, and paddled back toward shore with purpose. He emerged dripping and bounded up to Harold, planting his feet in the sand. Then he shook. Water sprayed everywhere Harold's shirt, Harold's pants, Harold's face and reading glasses. "Now why'd you have to go and do that?" Harold swiped at his eyes. But he was grinning beneath the complaint. Buddy barked once, sharp and joyful, and raced back toward the water. Margaret pulled a sandwich from the cooler, turkey on wheat, the way Harold had always liked it. She bit into it, tasting mayonnaise and crisp lettuce, and watched her husband wade into the shallows to wrestle a stick from Buddy's mouth. Harold had never wanted a dog. Too much trouble, he always said, too much noise, too much mess. Too many vet bills. 41 years of marriage, and he had never once wavered on the subject. Now he was knee-deep in lake water, laughing like a man half his age, while a scarred German shepherd with a bad leg tried to knock him over. Margaret chewed slowly. She thought about Derek Vance. She did not know where he had gone after that day back to Millbrook. Maybe, or somewhere else entirely. Drifting from place to place, carrying whatever he carried. She did not hate him anymore. That surprised her. The anger had faded somewhere along the way, replaced by something quieter, not forgiveness. Exactly, something more like recognition. He had been broken too, broken in different ways. Maybe, but broken. Maybe someday someone would see him the way she had finally seen Buddy, not as a problem to avoid, but as a creature in need of care. Or maybe not. She could not control that. Could only hope. Harold emerged from the water, pants soaked to the thighs, Buddy trotting beside him. They collapsed on the sand near her chair, both of them breathing hard. "Getting too old for this," Harold said. "You've been saying that for 20 years. Means it's probably true by now." Buddy flopped down between them, tongue hanging, sides heaving, his eyes closed. Within seconds, soft snores rose from his chest. Margaret reached down and rested her hand on his damp fur. His tail twitched once in his sleep, but did not wake him. That evening, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, the nightstand drawer open before her. The card lay on top of a pile of old receipts and forgotten photographs. White construction paper, edges soft with 36 years of handling. The handwriting on the front had not changed. "Thank you for trying. Mrs. Sullivan." Margaret picked it up, held it in both hands. She had kept it buried for so long, a reminder of failure. She had told herself, evidence of the time she had tried to help and watched everything fall apart around her. But the words did not say thank you for succeeding. They did not say thank you for saving me. They said thank you for trying. Danny Weaver, wherever he was now, had understood something she had missed for 3 decades. The trying mattered. The attempt had value, even when it was not enough. She opened the card. Inside was the drawing, a house with a yellow sun. 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall with brown hair, one small with yellow. Margaret traced the figures with her fingertip. Then she stood, walked to the bookshelf beside the window, and set the card there, propped against a row of paperback mysteries, visible, acknowledged, no longer hidden. 3 in the morning. Margaret's eyes opened to darkness. The old habit, the old hour. Her body still remembered the sound that used to drag her from sleep, that broken crying from the end of the street. But the house was silent. She lay still, listening. Harold's breathing, slow and deep, the ceiling fan turning lazy circles, the distant hum of the refrigerator. No howling, no weeping, no sound at all from Maple Street. Margaret pushed back the covers and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark. Moonlight came through the window above the sink, casting silver rectangles on the tile floor. Buddy lay on his bed in the corner. His head lifted when she entered. His tail thumped twice against the blanket. "Shh." Margaret's voice was soft. "Go back to sleep." She filled a glass with water from the tap and drank it slowly, watching him. He watched her back, then he lowered his head to his paws, his eyes closed, his breathing deepened. No scrambling to his feet, no pressing into corners, no watching the door as if waiting for someone to come and take everything away. Margaret set the empty glass in the sink. She stood for a moment, looking at the sleeping dog, at the moonlight on the floor, at the quiet kitchen that had once felt so empty. Then she went back upstairs. Harold had not moved. She slipped beneath the covers beside him, feeling the warmth of his body, the familiar shape of him in the darkness. Outside the window, the first gray light crept over the rooftops. A bird stirred somewhere in the oak tree. Margaret closed her eyes. From downstairs came a sound soft, barely audible, Buddy sighing in his sleep, the long, slow breath of an animal at peace. She smiled. Tomorrow she would wake up. Harold would feed the dog. She would make coffee. They would walk to the park, or drive to the lake, or simply sit together in the kitchen while the morning light came through the windows. Then the next day, and the next. That was all any of them could do. Show up. Keep going. Trust that it mattered. Margaret's breathing slowed. Her body relaxed into the mattress, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept without dreaming of anything at all. There is a quietness that settles after a story like this one. It rests somewhere in the chest, tender and familiar, not asking to be understood. Perhaps you recognize something in Margaret, the weight of waiting too long, the ache of wondering if we have done enough. Many of us have lain awake in the dark, listening to something we wished we could unhear. Many of us have carried small regrets like stones in our pockets, unsure whether to set them down or hold them closer. Some of us have been the one who finally showed up, late and uncertain. Some of us are still finding our way to that moment. It is all right if this story stirred something that feels unfinished. Not every feeling needs a name. Not every wound needs to heal completely before we can move forward. Some things are simply meant to be carried for a while, then gently set aside like a breath held too long. Finally released, wherever you are tonight, whatever you are holding, know that you do not carry it alone. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.